I am Sarah White and am pleased to bring you this short video on two pioneers and innovators, Gloria Niemeyer Francke and Clifton Latiolais. Both have full conversations, tributes, which you can find on the ASHP Foundation website under the Leadership Programs tab. It is common to think our challenges are insurmountable. However, there have always been obstacles to work around. We can learn from those that have gone before us as they face challenges such as being the first pharmacist in the hospital or being a woman. You will find there never has been enough resources nor money to do what we knew we should do. But these pioneers of pharmacy are resourceful, persisted, and found a way. The first excerpt pays tribute to Gloria Niemeyer Francke, who graduated from pharmacy school in 1942 and thus is an example of a woman in a male-dominated profession. You will hear how she had to deal with discrimination, be influential as a little L leader without a title, was the first executive secretary of ASHP when it was still part of APHA, and how her hobby became IPA, the International Pharmaceutical Abstracts. Her significant contribution was recognized through receiving both the Remington Medal and the Harvey A.K. Whitney Lecture Award, the highest awards in all of pharmacy and hospital pharmacy. The purpose of this video is to illustrate how exerting leadership does not always require a leadership title. As a brief overview of Gloria's career, she graduated from Purdue University in 1942 when few women entered pharmacy. She practiced as both a community and hospital pharmacist. Gloria served on the staff of APHA as the Assistant Director of the Hospital Pharmacy Division and for 11 years as the Executive Secretary for the newly formed ASHP. She went back to college at age 51 and received her PharmD degree. Gloria worked as a drug literature specialist at the National Library of Medicine, Chief Program Evaluation, Bureau of Alcohol and Drug Dependence Service for the Veterans Administration, and held several editorial positions. She also staffed the APHA Office of Women's Affairs and was responsible for global conferences for women pharmacists. Gloria passed away at 86 in 2008. I found her to be one of the most gracious, humble, and passionate, successful pharmacists I've ever met. She developed respect in both ASHP and APHA circles, and to have done so as a woman in the 1940s through the 60s is a remarkable accomplishment. I want to share some of the stories she told me over the past couple of years because they illustrate her successful career as a woman in a male-dominated profession. I also want to provide some quotes from her writings and remarks as insight into her thinking. When I asked her how she picked pharmacy, she told me she grew up in a very small town in Indiana where she just happened to go to work in the one and only community pharmacy when she was 14. When she graduated from high school at 16, she wanted to go to college and fortunately received a county scholarship to Purdue because she didn't really have much money. She indicated pharmacy came immediately to her mind, mostly because the only subject she knew that women studied at Purdue was home economics, and she was quite sure she didn't want home economics as a career. You could tell she was her own person from the beginning. When she graduated in 1942 from pharmacy school, she applied to work for the Eli Lilly Company and received a letter back saying they didn't hire women pharmacists. She said, "I still have that letter," with a twinkle in her eye and a sly smile indicating she showed them they should have hired her. She wasn't angry about this outright discrimination, but then chose to go to the University of Michigan Hospital because one of her college roommates was working there, and we in health system pharmacy are the better for that decision. I found fascinating her involvement in the development of IPA, the International Pharmaceutical Abstracts, which is so successful today. When she lived in Washington, D.C. in the late 1940s and worked for APHA and ASHP, which was then housed in the APHA building, After church on Sundays, she would go to the National Library of Medicine and spend 4 to 5 hours searching the literature for articles that would be of interest to hospital pharmacists. She made an index card of each article because she enjoyed doing it and saw it as sort of a hobby. William Heller, who was at that time a pharmacy intern at Johns Hopkins, happened to see all her index cards and was enthusiastic about the value to others, so he shared looking at other journals with her. They published in the ASHP Bulletin, which later became the American Journal of Hospital Pharmacy, now Health System Pharmacy, 6 comprehensive bibliographies every couple of years from 1951 through 1965. I find it interesting that the first 5 had Bill as the first author and Gloria the second author. It's not until the one in 1965 that she was listed as the first author with Bill the second author. It was these bibliographies that became the basis for IPA that her husband, Don Francke, started. She said she found the IPA idea and the significant success of it to be unbelievable. She indicated she found it amusing that she got credit for what was more like a hobby rather than real work. Perhaps the message is to try and do what you enjoy, as you never know where it's going to lead you. When talking about her decade as the executive secretary of the newly formed ASHP, she said, "I don't think anybody ever thought of me as anything but a running secretary. I don't think they thought of me as being any kind of a leader at all, which is sort of amusing." She knew she was what kept ASHP together in those early years. The accepted societal expectations at that time were that men were the leaders and women were in supportive roles. She had to lead without really challenging the men. I'm convinced had she been born even 20 years later, she would have been an elected ASHP president as well as perhaps APHA president. In one of our conversations, she innocently said, "I went to Selma, Alabama and marched in the civil rights demonstrations, and Don, her husband, knew better than to tell me not to go." She also added, "I suspect that wasn't a safe thing to do, but it was the right thing to do." Her commitment to the larger cause rather than to herself is to be admired, as well as her independence, especially as a woman. When talking about her involvement in international pharmacy, she indicated that at her first meeting in 1953, she gave a paper in French on ASHP, and she said they were amazed to find a young woman from the United States coming in boldly speaking in French, because at the time, FIP was really made up of old men. There just were no women in the organization. She continued saying that decisions tended to be made in locker rooms or after midnight, where women just didn't go. She could travel to any country in the world and personally know pharmacists there. They would actually seek her out with a big hug. I asked her about the pharmacy services in the assisted living facility that she resided in, and she replied, "There aren't any, and I keep telling them that needs to change, but they simply don't listen." So she never gave up speaking out on behalf of pharmacy as her passion because of its value. Gloria was the first woman pharmacist in 1987 to receive the Remington Medal since its inception in 1918. The Remington Medal is the highest award in all of pharmacy. I want to quote from her acceptance of this award, and I quote, "To receive this recognition is beyond my greatest expectations. An occasion such as this deepens our feelings about the profession we all love and nurture. Were I to present a medalist address today, I think I would talk about the burden of leadership, or perhaps the danger of scattering our forces. At times I feel that the burden of leadership prevents most of us from taking responsibility for the destiny of pharmacy. We dare not hold back and merely hope for the best for tomorrow. We must position ourselves to control the future of our profession, not only looking at the issues which benefit us today, but those that endure and will affect pharmacy practice tomorrow. I have a deepening fear that we may be scattering our forces and that pharmacy's future may be the poorer for it. We must have the ability to generate leaders, not a few, but many leaders who have a genuine commitment to the profession of pharmacy and to the men and women pharmacists who practice, who teach, who manage, who manufacture, who write and edit, and who do research. I'm not thinking about power politics. Rather, I'm thinking about bringing about a common view that transcends our areas of practice. This is only one thread that ties us all together. We are all pharmacists. With all of you, the honor of this medal is shared," unquote. These thoughts are just as true today as they were in 1987, and it's a call to action for each of us. In 1955, at the age of 33, her efforts were recognized by receiving the Harvey A.K. Whitney Lecture Award, the highest in hospital pharmacy. As of 2008, she was the second woman of only 9 women to receive it in its 58 years of existence. Her lecture was entitled Responsibilities of ASHP-Affiliated Chapters. I am again struck by her message regarding leadership. She discussed 6 qualities of good leaders that I want to paraphrase because they are very applicable today. The first is a harmonious or sympathetic relationship with the group they are working with. The second is ambition, not for ourselves, but for the cause, our profession. I like her statement, "Leaders take pay for their work, but they do not work for pay." The third quality is knowing where you want to go with your group. You must have a goal. The fourth is face opposition creatively, being tactful, tolerant, and understanding of other people's points of view. The fifth quality is having the skill to inspire confidence in others. And the sixth and final quality, and she said, to me, the most important, leaders must have enthusiasm. The next and final part of this video tells how Clifton J. Latiolais, as the first pharmacist employed by the Ohio State University Hospital in 1958, established residency training, and through his leadership built the pharmacy services into being internationally recognized. There are lessons for all of us from his leadership characteristics and his innovations, such as having pharmacy technicians administer medications, which are described. In the early 70s, I did my master's in residency with Cliff at Ohio State, and career-wise, it was the best thing I ever did. Cliff completed his undergraduate pharmacy education at Loyola University and his master's in residency at the University of Michigan with Don and Gloria Francke. Prior to coming to Ohio State, he held leadership positions at the University of Chicago Hospitals and the University of Rochester Strong Memorial Hospital. He also served as an assistant director of ASHP and APHA's audit of pharmaceutical services in hospitals, published in 1964 as the Mirror to Hospital Pharmacy. The recommendations set forth in the Mirror are still serving as a roadmap for the evolution of health system pharmacy. In 1958, Cliff became the director of pharmacy at Ohio State University Hospitals. Prior to Cliff's recruitment, the pharmacy operated as a unit of the laboratory supply stores, with clerks filling drug baskets for the nursing units. At this point in history, most hospitals did not have a pharmacist, and nurses had bottles of drugs, ampules, and vials on their units. This drug distribution system was called a floor stock system. The College of Pharmacy dean was instrumental in getting the pharmacy moved to a regular department of the hospital and setting up an affiliation with the hospital to provide undergraduate teaching and a graduate program in hospital pharmacy to train pharmacists to work in hospitals. During Cliff's tenure, he developed innovative pharmacy services that became internationally recognized. Remember when he started, nurses were making their own IV admixtures and in a sense dispensing from their stock bottles, and only talking to a pharmacist over the phone if one was available. He began the MS residency program in 1959, and during his tenure mentored 129 residents. He retired in 1983 and worked as a consultant to managed care pharmacies until he passed away in 1995. Cliff was very active in professional organizations, serving on boards of directors and as president of ASHP, APHA, and the American Managed Care Pharmacy Association. He was honored in 1968 with the Harvey A.K. Whitney Lecture Award, the highest recognition in hospital pharmacy. His lecture was entitled, "As We Move into History." This tribute will explore Cliff's leadership and legacy as lessons and tips for all of us. Now let's think about how Cliff achieved his impact so that he's even remembered today. In a few minutes, we're going to hear from several people who worked with him, but first permit me some reflections on his legacy. I think his legacy is at least twofold. First, the innovative services developed, and second, the leaders he trained, who have not only developed progressive services across the country, but also trained residents. I personally have worked with close to 100 residents in my career. Over the last several years, with my interest in leadership, I have talked with a number of Ohio State trained people because I was curious about how the Ohio State experience had enabled so many people to be successful leaders, as some of us were not necessarily the best and the brightest. The following are paraphrased reflections from people on what made Cliff a successful leader. Look for enduring lessons for yourself. I learned to push the envelope, to strive for perfection, and to never be satisfied with the status quo. Another way he functioned was to do more than what was expected and to always deliver on his commitments. His influence, even today, is indicated by this comment. I continue to ask myself, what would Cliff do? What an enduring legacy. It's not so much what I learned, but the values that I embrace that have shaped my career. The Latiolais program is now a family tree with branches all over the country and in every conceivable practice area. He allowed me to make mistakes, which was perhaps the best learning experience I ever had. And he never said, "I told you so." But we did analyze what happened and discussed ways to prevent it the next time. What have you gleaned so far that would make you more effective as a leader, even if you don't have a formal leadership title? You can have influence in your work group. Let's now look at Cliff's leadership success characteristics, which I think fall into three categories. First, he cared about what he did. Second, he cared about and developed his people. And third, he was never satisfied. Let me briefly illustrate each of these, again with paraphrasing others and my personal experience. Look for things you could do to enhance your leadership. First, he cared about what he did. He saw pharmacy as a calling, not just a job. His passion and zeal for pharmacy and the patient care meant he worked hard. I remember Cliff always being an advocate for the patient and wanting to improve the drug therapy component of their care in very practical ways. Above all, he held himself personally responsible and accountable for all of pharmacy services and what his staff did. In essence, he always placed the profession and the provision of pharmacy services above any personal interests. I learned from Cliff to appreciate how we got where we are today. In other words, our services heritage. He built on the past but innovated. He thought boldly and creatively because he wanted to expand the pharmacist's role and ensure patient safety. Cliff was never bound by convention. Who else in the late 60s would have thought about taking vacant nursing positions and developing pharmacy-coordinated unit dose and medication administration, using pharmacy technicians to do the patient administration? The clinical pharmacist supervised the technician, and as a resident, I worked as a clinical pharmacist, and I found it to be a very tight system. If the patient missed a dose, was off the unit for example, it was the clinical pharmacist who made the decision based on the drug what the appropriate action would be. Likewise, at the end of each shift, I verified that every scheduled dose had been administered, or a note on the MER indicated the reason why not, and if appropriate, I contacted the physician. In addition to caring about what he did, Cliff cared about and developed his people. He had high expectations of himself and others. I found he gave people more than they thought they could handle, which developed their confidence. Cliff inspired people to reach down deep and give their best effort by doing so himself as a role model. I remember his attitude that has served me well in my career regarding new things. He would say, just go get the skills and knowledge you don't have, as things will always change during your career, and you can do anything you put your mind to. An approach I picked up was his intent not to clone himself, nor build an Ohio State empire, but to develop people's own unique competencies that would sustain them throughout their careers, no matter what they did. Cliff would never take all the credit himself for successes, but was good at investing it in his people. So after caring about what he did and about his people, Cliff was never satisfied. Even after he retired, he would ask me what I was doing about whatever the current issue was every time he would see me at a meeting. He first thought about what the right thing to do was, as opposed to worrying about whether he had the resources or support to do it. He always seemed to be thinking about ideas from all perspectives. I have found his philosophy, first commit to it and worry about how later, to be a key in my career. He always encouraged us to customize services to the needs of our patients and not just take the OSU model and superimpose it, as every place is unique. He was a great strategist who thought about how it would impact others by doing his homework so he was prepared when he proposed changes. Cliff always had a backup plan, which was acceptable, and he knew when to use it, as opposed to going down in flames, holding on to Plan A if he couldn't get Plan A. So what can you do to improve your caring about what you do, the people you work with, and never being satisfied? Cliff's legacy not only includes the services he developed, but the leaders he trained. As of 2009, counting Cliff, residents, and Ohio State staff, 9 have been ASHP president, 6 have received the Whitney Award, 3 have been APHA president, and several have served as president of ACCP, the American College of Clinical Pharmacists, AACP, the American Association of Colleges of Pharmacy, and ACPE, the American Council of Pharmaceutical Education.